Doug. So great to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Since this is your first time coming on the podcast, I'm sure you're not new to all of our audience, but to some, maybe, hopefully, actually, right? It's always good to meet new people. Could you start by telling the audience a little bit about your background and what you've really been focusing on today, and then we'll have a fun conversation.
Yeah, you bet. So my name is Doug Stevens. I'm the founder of Retail Profit. And Retail Profit is a global consultancy in the retail space that focuses on the future of retail. We sort of sit at the intersection of economics, demographics, technology, and media, and work to put together a cohesive story about how changes in each of those areas are affecting consumer behavior and how retailers can begin to embrace that and build strategy around that. Prior to forming Retail Profit, which is now about 16 years ago, I spent about 20 years in the retail industry working across a number of different disciplines, everything from really the front lines of store management and retail management all the way through to general management in both Canada and the US. Today, our clients include brands like L'Oreal, Walmart, BMW, Louis Vuitton. So it's a huge spectrum, not only of retail brands, but also brands in the service sector, whether that's banking, insurance, healthcare, etc. I've written 3 books currently on the future of retail, some of which folks in the audience might have heard of. I'm now working on a 4th book that is called The Future of Competition. And it's really going to be looking at sort of this unique era that we find ourselves in as an industry and what the future of competitive dominance looks like and what it will take for companies to become dominant in the space. In addition to writing and researching, I also do media work for CBC Radio Canada. I'm a syndicated columnist with them, and also do some writing for the Business of Fashion out of the UK. And that's me.
Very cool. It's certainly an interesting time that we're in. So it's nice that these brands can look to you for guidance. And congrats on the new book. Can't wait to see it when it comes out. Is there any timeline in terms of when you're thinking it'll be released?
Yeah, it's slated to come out in spring of 2026. And I'm just in the midst of writing it now.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
What's your process like when you're going through that? Obviously, there's a ton of information going through your head. Do you have a certain way? You've obviously, since you've wrote a few of these, has it changed? Has your process to writing a new book changed compared to what you did in the past?
For me, it's been I've written books in a few different ways. My first book was sort of an amalgamation of essays more than anything. At the time of my first book, which was around 2013, I'd been spending a lot of time just thinking about sort of the era that retail was coming out of and the era that it was going into, and how the fundamentals of society had changed, just in terms of our economy, in terms of the influence and effect of media on consumer behavior. Certainly the technological landscape was evolving to be much different. So it was sort of a collection of essays. The second book was really born more out of presentations that I was doing. I had built a presentation called Re-Engineering Retail, and it was really digging deeply into how technology in particular was shifting consumer expectations and really shifting our whole concept of what a quote-unquote store is and how we shop in them, both in the physical and the digital realm. And so it was really a matter of taking 3 or 4 years of working on that presentation and presenting it to audiences, and then sitting down finally and saying, okay, what if this were a book now? This book is really born out of more, I think, of just a recognition that we find ourselves as an industry right now, I think, in a very, very difficult period. And it's a very different period than this industry was born out of. When we look around the landscape at brands like Walmart, Target, a lot of the huge manufacturing companies and CPG companies, they were born out of the 1950s and 60s. And there was a reason for that. There were certain conditions that existed at that time, both from a government standpoint, from an economic standpoint, certainly from an educational standpoint and access to education. All of these things fed into that remarkable period of growth, which lasted from about 1950 to about 1975. A lot of the brands that we see in the landscape today were beneficiaries of that unique time period. And so this book is really an examination of what those unique factors were, why we today are in danger of losing them, and what the difficulties will be for brands and for retailers if indeed we lose sight of that, and how retailers can work to build those pillars within their businesses. So it's going to be a very, very different sort of book, but I think it'll be one that I hope really gives readers a completely different view of the industry and where we're at.
I love it. I'd love to shift focus a little bit. I mean, I'm sure it's still along some of the same lines, but to really ask you around, like, how are basic economics of the consumer goods market changing? And really, what does that say about the state of consumers today?
Yeah, I think that the biggest single change, and we're seeing the result of this every day, it's the contraction of the middle class consumer, and really the entire evaporation of the mid tier of retail. I'm in Canada, and we recently just experienced the bankruptcy of a company called Hudson's Bay, which is not only a relatively well-known department store brand, but it is also, in fact, the oldest retailer in North America. It was started in 1670, when America and Canada were just a twinkle in somebody's eye. So that, to my mind, in the Canadian landscape, and you could argue that brands like Sears in the American landscape were the equivalent. They were really the cornerstone of the American shopping experience, or the Canadian shopping experience. It's where we started most of our shopping trips. And that was really the consequence of having a broad, inclusive, and robust middle-class consumer. Yes, there were luxury markets, and yes, there were discounters, but for the most part, most people shopped in the middle. Today, we're not only seeing an evaporation of that middle, but we're also seeing a continual redefinition of what the middle is. It started with the shopping centers and the department stores. It then sort of moved to the mid-level chains. Now it's big box stores are being threatened by this. And even aspirational luxury brands now are sort of falling into the chasm. And it's becoming clear that we're moving into an economy where, on the one hand, you have, Walmart, you have dollar stores, you have Shein and Temu, and on the other side of the economy, you have Louis Vuitton, Prada, and Hermes. And there's not a hell of a lot anymore between those two. And if there is, it's likely under a lot of financial strain right now. So that, I think, is one of the most profound shifts, and something that virtually every brand needs to be concerned about.
It is interesting. It's either fast fashion or luxury. Where's the middle ground? And I know there are some that still, but not nearly as much as many as there were in years past, right?
That's right. And it's playing out in every category. It's not even just in retail. It's in hospitality. It's in the restaurant world. Virtually every kind of experience now, or every kind of product or service, is sort of, it's one of two kinds of experiences. It's either dirt cheap or crazy expensive.
I'd say even, I know you were mentioning, you've done some work with like the car company. Same thing for retail as it relates to these car dealerships, right?
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing. Even cars that used to be like like an affordable or a middle of the kind of price point
Mm-hmm.
vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
they either shifted to be. I'd say for that, almost everything is like luxury focused with how high car prices have gone up in years past. I know there's still a few brands, right, that you can get at a lesser rate, but you're right. So it's been pretty much every area of retail that's been impacted. But I would say the cool part of some of this is the emerging like retail tech for some of it that has emerged,
Mm-hmm.
like in the recent years, like croissant for I don't know if you've seen croissant, but recently someone just showed it to me where you could be on like a luxury retail site and croissant sits in your browser and it'll tell you how much it'll buy back a certain item before you buy it, which is kind of cool. But see, that's something that because of the times that we're in, probably had the opportunity to be created because now we have this high cost for something because you probably have more people now that are into luxury fashion maybe going a bit out of their price range. And now that tool was needed in order to say it's not $500 for this jacket, it's actually only $250 because they're going to buy it back in
Right.
6 months.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. It's do you think we'll continue to see innovations maybe like that or across the board because of this gap as well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're definitely seeing the advent of more and more. I would say not even just technology, but actually, business concepts that are aimed at being the bridge between those two very different worlds. The growth of resale right now is just astonishing. I mean, resale in the apparel market now is as big or bigger than the fast fashion market. Duplicates of luxury items now are an industry unto themselves. If you can go to a site called dupe.com and you actually can just as you said, you can append dupe.com into your browser if you're looking at any product, and it'll point you towards duplicates of that product that are a fraction of the price. So there's sort of these two extremes of value between, that fast fashion t-shirt that you're going to wear once, wash once, and throw in the garbage, or the $850 Prada t-shirt. And then there's this landmass in the middle of those two worlds that is resale, or that is a duplicate or a knockoff world that has sort of replaced the mid-tier of retail. So yeah, it's an interesting time. It's a worrying time for a lot of businesses, because the fact of the matter is the majority of businesses in North America are not high luxury and are not dollar stores. They're the minority. Most of those businesses have been around trying to serve what used to be a middle-class consumer. And so it's going to be a concerning time for an increasing number of them.
And some of these brands will have tough decisions to make because they probably have to start to look into, do I become the fast fashion, or which total different strategies, right? Or do I become that luxury brand, which is not, and in some cases, they can't too, right? Like, because
Right.
so much of, like, if you want to be a luxury brand, that's kind of something you have to be on day one. It's really hard to reinvent yourself as, hey, we're actually luxury and our price point just went up. And,
Right.
do you think that'll be the case as well? Like, it'll be very difficult for some of these brands to reinvent themselves just because of where they're at?
Yeah, it's already happening. In fact, just over the weekend, a reporter from Vogue magazine reached out to me, and her story was on that exact thing, that Main Street or high street retailers now in the UK are struggling to try and understand what their value is, right? They're not, to your point, they're not fast fashion players, because fast fashion, of course, is predicated on the idea of mass production, vertical integration, all that good stuff. They're not luxury because they don't have the heritage or the exclusivity, right, to justify the astronomical price point. So what are they doing? They're just moving their prices up, right? They're trying to basically pass for something that is quote unquote aspirational. But the real question is, does the aspirational consumer even exist anymore? And if they do, are they buying the genuine item from the real or some other, or on Poshmark, or from some other reseller? Can you just sort of fake being an aspirational brand? And my answer would be, in the long term, no. Every time you move your price point up, you're simply going to disenfranchise a percentage of the consumers that you have. And I don't think you're going to get a reach down from the luxury consumer, So it's a very difficult spot that a lot of retailers are going to find themselves in. And we're going to see a lot of retail go away. We're going to see a tremendous amount of retail consolidate. And that too raises really important questions. LVMH is the largest luxury house in the world, on an order of magnitude larger than virtually any of the other luxury houses. And they're just buying up more and more brands all the time. Walmart is literally a vacuum for other companies. I mean, they've been on a buying spree, buying all kinds of different tech companies and startups and data companies and marketing companies. Amazon too. So this sort of begs questions around, do we put ourselves as an industry into a too big to fail situation? I mean, let's just think about if you had an Enron-esque kind of situation at Walmart, what would that do? What kind of tailspin could that throw the U.S. economy into, or the Chinese economy for that matter, considering about 80% of everything Walmart sells comes from China? So there are some really kind of macro issues that I think we as an industry have to reckon with, that are of tremendous concern.
Let's talk a little bit, staying on the topic of, you mentioned technology in there, right? They're buying up some technology. AI, you can't go a day without hearing AI now. If it doesn't get inserted into any conversation at least a couple times a day, you're probably, maybe you're not talking to the right people, because it is everywhere. Everyone is talking about it. As it relates to AI, though, what do you feel we aren't talking about with respect to AI as it relates to retail?
So there are a couple things from my perspective. One is that in the short term, AI is going to make a difference to those who are able to adapt and adopt at the right time, right? In the same way that you could argue that Walmart, because of its early pioneering of operational software, had an advantage over other companies. It was maybe a decade-long runway of advantage over most of their competitors because they were just so damned operationally efficient. And a lot of that was being driven by a really good use of enterprise software. But at a certain point, everybody sort of rose to parity, right? So Target and Walmart are, basically using the same suite of applications to run their businesses. There's no technology advantage. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI, where, whether it's 10 years down the road or perhaps less, most businesses, big or small, are going to be operating with an accepted suite of applications that are infused or embodied with AI that they're running their businesses with. In the same way that Shopify creates this universe of applications for their small merchants that basically put them on an even footing with the larger enterprises, the same thing will happen with AI. So the question we have to answer today, or we should be thinking about today, is at that point when that day comes, what is the advantage? How do you create a discernible advantage? And my theory is this. The technology certainly is just going to be table stakes. The question will be, what is going to allow you to use the technology to create an advantage? And I think that's going to be human creativity and ingenuity. Now, the interesting thing about human creativity is that is actually a diminishing resource. Children today are testing less creative than they were even a decade ago. In terms of the general population, it's widely accepted that about 2% of the general population today is what you would call divergently creative, people that can sit down with a blank sheet of paper and really create amazing ideas. So I think companies should be doing two things at the same time. They should be investing in their understanding of and their capacity to use AI, but at the same time, they should be developing strategies around how to actually connect with and bring into their organization the most creative people that they can find across every discipline, whether it's accounting, legal, store operations, marketing. Find the most creative and ingenious people you can find, and then give them the tools to work with. And therein lies your advantage. So that's one piece of AI. The other piece that I can tell you firsthand, audiences are extremely reluctant to talk about, and that is the unmitigated fallout that it is going to create in employment. The technocrats would love us to believe that AI is going to create as many jobs as it wipes out. I think that's complete and utter BS. We're talking not about, the 1970s when 5 men on an assembly line could be replaced by one machine. We're potentially talking about entire professions being wiped out. The entire legal profession within corporate could virtually evaporate. Once we have AI agents that are doing all of the case law and all of the litigation work, these are realities. I mean, these are things that we sit on the edge of right now. So I think companies have to, first of all, understand how they're going to address that. How are you going to, when the day comes where you have to lay off 100,000 people, what does that look like? And how do you do it? And is there a way to do that humanely? And the other question we have to ask from a governmental standpoint is, are we prepared to have a serious discussion around universal basic income? And if not, are we simply going to revert back to the Gilded Age where we let people live in the gutter while, those who are fortunate enough to benefit from the productivity enhancement of AI live the life of millionaires and billionaires? That is where we're going. So big questions ahead.
Yeah, and there's so many different effects that, like you were saying, that will end up creating as a result. I have a theory too, Doug, that I feel like these super creative thinkers that we were talking about, even no matter what it is, right? Accounting, marketing, and all these different areas. What I'm noticing is the smartest people, like not just always the smartest, but usually even more so than the smartest, the most creative people are starting their own thing.
Very often,
I think we're going to see unprecedented, like you talked about, job loss as a potential with AI. I think we're also going to see unprecedented acquisitions, micro acquisitions of people who started the really solid either accounting firm or marketing agency related to a particular niche, and we're able to leverage AI to have some automations, because I think a lot of these big brands are going to struggle to get the super creative people to sign up for a job there, versus now what AI has allowed them to do is go maybe start their own thing because some of the back office stuff is handled for them.
Right. Yeah.
So
Definitely.
I think you'll end up seeing more micro acquisitions. So maybe the average company, big company that made 1 or 2 acquisitions a year, maybe they're making 10, 20 as a result. And it's kind of like to get the creative people in a different way.
Yeah, that's very possible. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because oftentimes the most creative people are the ones that end up leaving organizations. And the reason for that is that while most companies today, if you ask them in a survey, how important is creativity and ingenuity, innovation, they'll the reflex is, well, of course that's vitally important, that's a core value, et cetera, et cetera. The truth of the matter is, most organizations don't value creativity. They don't value innovation. They're terrified of it. most managers within companies don't nurture new ideas. They don't nurture the mavericks. They want the mavericks to just do their jobs. Just hit your objectives. Don't come to me with fancy ideas. And so those employees who are genuinely creatively driven get frustrated and they leave, and they either find a company that does value their imagination, or they use their imagination, as you say, to start their own thing. And you're right, with the advent of AI and AI agents, the popular line now is that we're on the brink of somebody starting $1 trillion company without any employees.
As close as we are, we're also further from it than I've been hearing you've probably heard this, like, you probably hear the classic, in 6 months this will happen, in 6 months, and then 6 months happens, and we're closer than we were 6 months ago, but we're not. Like, I keep hearing, Doug, in 6 months we won't need software developers anymore. No, not yet. I mean, they're gonna it'll definitely be closer, but like not to that point. No.
Well, the old adage is we tend to overestimate change in the short term and underestimate it in the long term, right? I mean, everyone was saying, I recall very clearly in around 2008, 2010-ish, people were saying that, social media will completely eradicate and replace legacy media. Well, that didn't happen. But can we imagine a world today where, as a business, you don't have social media? I mean, how many businesses, given all the chaos in the social media landscape and all the adverse effects that we know social media has on the population, how many businesses have left? Right? They can't. It's an inextricable part now of marketing. So there's an example, I think, in an extremely short period of time where a technological innovation became an embedded part of business. Did it do what we thought it might do in the short term? No. But has it had a long-term profound influence on the way we do business? Yes.
Well, Doug, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. This was awesome.
Likewise. Thanks.
You fit the vibe I always like these to be coffee shop conversations, because this is the first time you and I have met, right? Camera to camera.
That's right.
But hopefully we meet in person at some point as well. I'm sure we'll run into each other just in the community. But really appreciate having you on. We'll be definitely looking out for the new book, and then linking to already the books that you've put out.
Awesome.
And really appreciate your time here today.
Thanks, Jared.